Welcome to another episode of the Watchdog with me, Lowkey, here on Mint Press, where week in, week out, we are going against the grain, covering the stories which are regularly ghettoized and marginalized outside the earshot of the masses. Now, this week we have a very important episode dealing with the legal methods which the British state and seemingly the Israeli embassy has involvement in this process, is using to shut down a movement which has ignited the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of people across this country who believe deeply, with deep conviction, in the liberation of Palestine and are seeking new, creative and innovative ways to fight for that aim within this country. Now, the movement that I am talking about, of course, is Palestine Action. It has been inescapable for anybody on social media concerned with Palestine across the last 3 years. Palestine Action has launched hundreds of operations against Israeli arms factories in this country and the factories of companies who sell weapons to Israel. That movement has led to the shutting down of Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company's HQ in London. It also led to the selling of one of Elbit Systems' subsidiaries, Ferranti Technologies, in Oldham at a loss. We've also seen Palestine Action's activity lead to the British Ministry of Defence cancelling £280 million worth of contracts with Elbit Systems. That is unprecedented. We have not seen a movement like that in this country ever. In British history, we have not had something like this happen before. So today we are sitting with one of the founders of Palestine Action, Huda Amori, who is actually within the next month or two sitting in court on trial for her freedom. And she is doing that as an outstretch of her hand to her people in Palestine, in Gaza, the 12 million Palestinians within Palestine, outside of Palestine. She's reaching out to them and giving her blood, sweat, and tears for their liberation. And what is being done to her is an extension of what Israel has attempted to do to the Palestinians. And of course, the Palestinian story is a story of the refusal to die. And today we are joined by somebody who I believe has channeled a lot of this energy in the most effective direction that we have seen in many years in this country. Huda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that incredible introduction.
Well, it's great to have you here, and it's going to be very useful, I think, for our viewers to hear what exactly it is you are facing and how you are hoping to deal with what the British state and, of course, ultimately, there's involvement of Israel seemingly in the Palestine Action cases. We're hoping to hear more about that too. So I guess if you could first break down what exactly you are facing across the next few months.
So myself and 7 others will be going on trial at Snaresbrook Crown Court from November 13th. And that's because we've been charged with various different charges amongst the eight of us, but they all relate to the first 6 months of Palestine Action. So this was a pivotal time in launching the direct action movement capable of shutting down Israel's weapons trade in this country. And so it includes storming 77 Kingsway, which was the former London headquarters. It was one of our first actions that we did. We went into the offices, sprayed paint, wrote that we would be back. And then we came back the next week And we kept taking action repeatedly against the London headquarters. And then some of us had gone onto the roof of an Elbit factory in Shenstone. This factory called UAV Engines produces the engines for Israeli drones, specifically the Hermes 450, which the Israeli military describe as the backbone of their drone fleet. It is used regularly to surveil, harass, and massacre the Palestinian people. And so we were on the roof of that factory for several days, and we shut it down for that time. And it was shut down for a couple of weeks at least because we had dismantled the infrastructure of that site. So there's several different actions, and others have done other actions that are included within this 6-month time frame. But on top of that, they just seem to have thrown on top blackmail charges, which is significantly more serious. So to speak, it does mean higher chance of going to prison. But one of the most concerning things about the blackmail charge is that it allows them to put on orders. If you're convicted and imprisoned, even after you're released from prison, you can be banned for life from campaigning, from signing a petition, from doing anything towards campaigning for the freedom of the Palestinian people. So it's clearly extremely politically motivated. And we haven't seen blackmail charges be brought against activists for over a decade, at least. So they're obviously trying it, but at the same time, we knew, and we still know 3 years on from taking all of those actions that we were never criminal, that we were never the guilty party, that it is these weapons companies and everyone who facilitates them that are the guilty ones, who are guilty of war crimes, who are guilty of developing weapons on an occupied people, and who are able to get away with it. And not just get away with it, they are supported by the state. They're supported by the British police. They're supported by the Attorney General, and the Israeli embassy, as we're seeing, has the ability to talk to our politicians about our cases and about what defenses we can use when I can't go and walk in to their office and say, hey, I've grown up here in this country. Can I talk about my rights as a citizen in this country? But they're willing to open their doors to a foreign apartheid state, to the lobbying of a foreign apartheid state, and to the weapons makers of a foreign state.
I think also an interesting aspect of the police dealing with this case is that some that we've been able to identify of the police forces in this country use NICE systems as part of their investigations. Now, NICE systems is at least partially owned by Elbit Systems. So what that means is that the level of integration that exists between the British police, or parts of the British police, and Elbit is already significant. Now, you alluded there to politicians really taking up the cause against you. And the clip we're about to play is of MP Michael Fabricant of the Conservative Party with his impressive wig in Parliament, identifying Palestine Action. So we're gonna play this clip and lobbying for Israel against Palestine Action. Let's hear this.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Chris Pincher and I have been working very closely to ensure that the police act strongly and swiftly in Shenstone, near Lichfield, over constant demonstrations at an Israeli company which supplies arms to the British armed forces. Now, 2 people went to trial at a magistrate's court in Warsaw, and they were acquitted. And it is reported, and we don't know for sure because it's not a court of record, that the judge said on the principle of proportionality, the action was proportionate in comparison to the crimes against humanity which they were acting to stop by the Israelis. I mean, I think that if it were true is outrageous. What can be done within the judicial system to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen, if indeed it did?
Now, Huda, as a co-founder of Palestine Action, what is your response directly to Michael Fabricant on what he has said about Palestine Action?
Look, he has, from the start of Palestine Action, when we were on the roof of the UAV engines factory in his constituency, he made a quote saying that we were supporting terrorism. But it's quite clear that Michael Fabricant is the one supporting terrorist organizations. He has gone and bent over backwards, basically, to support Elbit Systems. He's made repeated comments in support of them. He's lied in support of them. And now he's even trying to take it up to Parliament to try and get them to either overturn this acquittal or to try and change and try and scare magistrates in the future, right, from finding people not guilty. But for us at Palestine Action, it does not matter if you find us guilty or not guilty in a court of law in this country. We know we're not the guilty party, but if a judge cannot see that, or if they can see that, it is irrelevant, because we understand that history will vindicate us all, and that no matter what the result is, we are here to shut down this company, and it won't be long before we get rid of the Elbit weapons factory in his constituency, making engines for the Israeli military drone fleet, and we will kick them out whether he likes it or not.
Now, interestingly, when we're looking at the example of Michael Fabricant, this is somebody who, whether explicitly or not, functionally, he is serving as an instrument of what Israel would want within the Shenstone context.
Yeah.
But there's other ways that Israel seems to have sought to interfere in the Palestine Action cases. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so it started off just a few weeks into Palestine Action when we were going into the London headquarters in the first month of Palestine Action. There was a meeting between Dominic Raab, who was Foreign Secretary of this country at the time, the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and Benny Gantz, who was Israel's defense minister. And Israel basically referred to our actions at the headquarters and then asked them, in so many words, to crush our movement and to stop it from happening. And I do remember seeing this. And when we saw it at the time, this was 1 month in and many of us had done different types of campaigning before, had done divestment campaigns, different lobbying, protests, etc. I had never seen such a strong reaction so quickly. So for me personally, I said, this validates everything we're doing. And we knew we were on the right track. They don't want us to do this, then that's exactly what we have to be doing. And it was clear that they were scared as well, that if people just said, that's it, we're going for it, we're taking direct action, we're not going to appeal to the government anymore or to anyone else to stop these factories from operating, we'll just do it, that they'd be powerless to stop it. And so that meeting happened very early on in Palestine Action, and it was shortly after that we were charged. Actually, we were stopped by counterterrorism police, interrogated for 4 hours, under Schedule 7 legislation. And they made it very clear that the only reason we were stopped was because we were activists in Palestine Action. And then shortly after that, they had charged us with blackmail, as I mentioned before. But we saw recently, after information requests were sent to the Attorney General, and then a review was done for the information.
Sorry, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Schedule 7.
Yeah.
What it provides the state with is the right to actually get more access to the individual than an arrest does.
Yeah.
Because in the case of arrest, you have the option of answering no comment to questions that are asked of you. What Schedule 7 does as legislation, it means that you have no legal right not to answer any question which is asked to you. And also you have to give up all electronic devices to the state. And so Schedule 7 Terrorism Act has been wielded against yourself and against Palestine Action.
Yeah. So it was against me and Richard Barnard, and it was shortly after this meeting, like a month or so after. And like you said, you don't have a chance to say no comment. I never realized how much I liked the ability to say no comment or say nothing at all until I was in that position. And, they had immediately, they split you up. They asked you for all of your passwords. And, they used a lot of the information they got from that stop to charge us with other things in Palestine Action. I didn't give the password to my laptop because of many different reasons, which I explained then. But they still try to use that information despite repeatedly, they repeatedly say to you, I know you probably experienced it as well, that everything is only going to be used to check if you're into terrorism stuff, right? Whatever that means.
Yeah.
But it was very clear that was not what this was about. It was about getting our stuff to try and charge us with more things and put more serious offences on. And, then they ask you like ridiculous questions about your family, about Palestine Action, etc. But yeah, so it was after that they charged us with blackmail, and they did use stuff from that stop, even though it's not meant to be used for that purpose.
Right.
And so recently we got information from the Attorney General, and we asked for correspondence between the Attorney General and the Israeli embassy. And we've also asked for similar information from different government bodies, and it's been difficult, to say the least, to get that information out. But first, we got some information from the Attorney General. Lots of it was redacted. We did a review, and then we got more information, still loads of it redacted. But the stuff that came through was very clear, and clear enough to show that the Israeli embassy had been trying to interfere in our court cases. And this is in UK courts, right? Like we often in the Palestine movement, like for example, when I was at university, very small example, but I was doing a boycott, divestment and sanctions campaigning for my university to divest from Caterpillar. And the Israeli embassy, I did a similar thing, got a freedom of information request. And the Israeli embassy had met with my vice chancellor to talk about the campaign to divest from Caterpillar. And my vice chancellor would never meet with me. Wow. She also was the one who spearheaded making a lot of links with Israel, etc. Right. But it's like the same things happening from a much smaller scale to a much bigger thing, but with much wider implications. And so we can see this now at the Israeli embassies. They can have meetings with them, and they're discussing many things which has implications for our court cases. But the interesting thing is that a lot of this comes after we won. We were winning. We were winning in court. And, I'm sure we're going to continue to win in court despite these setbacks. But there have been certain precedents that have been set which have deliberately diminished our ability to use some defences in court. And some of these things were discussed in this meeting in May 2022.
So interestingly, what you also have is a correlation between more people being found guilty within magistrate settings also, and this seeming pressure which was applied to the CPS. Could you tell us a bit about that correlation?
Yeah, definitely. So we, like I said before, like our first court case was December 2021. It was a magistrate's court, and the judge said that because these actions and these people had thrown glass bottles of red paint and locked on, so to shut down the Elbit factory in Shenstone. And the judge categorically said that because their actions were proportional to what they were campaigning against, which was the crimes of this company, and that because they chose the target that he said that it was proportional and therefore they were not guilty of committing a crime. And that was our first court case, not just in Palestine Action, but for anyone ever who's taken action against Elbit, because historically, before Palestine Action, no one ever went to trial for taking direct action against Elbit. And then after that, we were seeing cases be dropped, similar cases were getting dropped, and other cases were being won in the magistrate's court. Now we're seeing that a lot of cases that go to the magistrate's court, which is a lower level than a Crown Court, it means one judge or maybe three decide if you're guilty or not guilty. But because the law is so restricted after there was a recent judgment because of the Colston statute, it meant that people couldn't rely, or the judges wouldn't allow the proportionality defence into the courtroom. And so it led to more convictions as a result.
So in terms of the lobbying that Israel seems to have done of the CPS, what you also have is the engagement of the Attorney General by key Israel lobby groups. So you have the Board of Deputies, you have the CST, both of them have got close to the head of the CPS on this issue. You also have the history of, Keir Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. This was somebody that the only foreign state attorney general that he actually met with, right, and received hospitality and gifts from was Moshe Lador, who had that position in Israel.
Yeah.
Now, Keir Starmer during that period actually went as far as blocking the prosecution of Tzipi Livni. Tzipi Livni was somebody that was a minister in the government that bombarded Gaza in 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead, and then an Operation Protective Edge in 2014. She was also a minister at that time. It's talking about something like 2,500 Palestinians killed, including the massacre at Shuja'iyya and the invasion. So you had judges in this country that were issuing arrest warrants for Tzipi Livni at that time. So Starmer was under some form of pressure. What we also know, though, is that at the same time, several of those lobby groups that I mentioned before were actually lobbying for a change in British laws around universal jurisdiction. And so Starmer blocked that prosecution before the change in universal jurisdiction happened. But then what we now know later is that Tzipi Livni has been made a director of Elbit. So you have within the British legal system a contingency that seems to be dead against any type of legal accountability for Israel. You have seen the push to keep Israel out of any type of legal scrutiny in this country. And what Palestine Action has done is force it into that space by essentially people sacrificing themselves and their freedom potentially by kind of forcing that into court. The response to Palestine Action shows that it has captured a particular feeling that Israel finds very difficult to dissipate and kind of dissolve in a way. Now, the interesting thing I would say is there are those that make the argument that Palestine Action, through doing this, is irresponsibly putting people in harm's way in terms of what the state does. But let me respond directly to that. Keir Starmer, when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, it was the same time that he would have been dealing with cases that came from young boys who stood outside the Israeli embassy in 2008, 2009, who were struck with batons by the police and who were engaged in direct confrontation with police. Now, those young men, a lot of them ended up getting hit with 2-year sentences and more even. Their lives were irrevocably changed simply because they stood outside the Israeli embassy at a time when weapons manufactured here were being used on people in Gaza, including white phosphorus. What we also know, so what we're saying is that simply by going to demonstrations, these young people were criminalized. What we also know is there has been the history of spy cops infiltrating, as Asa Winstanley has covered extensively in Electronic Intifada, of a particular spy cop by Rob Francis, if I remember particularly, infiltrating the pro-Palestinian organizations. What we also know is that Rachel Corrie's family, the very family whose daughter was killed by a caterpillar bulldozer in Gaza, when her family were fighting for justice, a private intelligence company was hired to infiltrate and spy on them. For those under the illusion that standing on the street with a placard means you do not have the eyes of the surveillance state on you, or disciplinary mechanisms aimed at you, you are lying to yourself. That is not to say that hundreds of thousands of people in this country would not actually be willing to go to prison for Palestine if they know that on the other side of it, there is a struggle which is leading in a good direction. And Palestine Action has already shown that things can be achieved. Hence, that shows why this type of response from Israel and Britain has been aimed at this movement, because it has captured these feelings and channeled them in a direction which not only makes visible what Israel is doing in your communities, but also shows you ways in which you can stop that happening and directly confront those organizations working in that way. If you could tell us, Huda, a bit about how these key victories have been achieved, because let's remember that during that time when you saw the 240 to 80, I think it's 280 million pound contracts be cancelled by the British Ministry of Defence. In one case, citing national sovereignty as one of the reasons, or operational sovereignty. Very interesting turn of phrase. You saw the value of shares in Elbit UK drop by almost 20% in this country. You know, that's in the midst of Ukraine, which has been an arms fair and a bonanza of corporate profit for war profiteers. Could you tell us about each step of these victories? Because there's been key victories for Palestine Action which need to be emphasized for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So our first one was the Oldham factory. And, you know, I'd come from the north, and several of us, including the local community, had been involved in campaigning, you know, lobbying councillors, etc. And people continued that campaign in Oldham for a few years before Palestine Action came about. But when we started, one of the actions we did was one of the factories we targeted several times, very intensively as well, was the Oldham weapons factory. And I think it was every month for a year and a half. They were either being blockaded, or people were getting on their roof. People were going inside and destroying their weapons from inside the factory. And repeatedly, they were getting shut down. And, you know, they would get loads of security. They get the security with dogs, and they'd have security on the roof. And still people were managing to get inside this factory. So it became constant for them. And not only were we disrupting them on a constant basis, which is one of the main principles of Palestine Action, is sustained direct action, that we go again and again and again and make it impossible for them to operate. They were forced to shut down that factory in January 2022, and that was matched with community mobilization. You know, the community was coming out every single week, and these two things, whilst not completely working, you know, hand in hand, and not every plan was discussed beforehand, etc., there was unity between all different fronts of the campaign in Oldham. And shutting down that huge weapons factory was a significant first victory, and it shows what could be done and what will continue to be done.
And also key to the Oldham campaign was people going door to door in the local vicinity with information about what Elbit was doing, people setting up a stall in the local town centre to tell people about what was happening in that factory. And overall, we now know that the subsidiary for Anti-Technologies was sold at a loss.
Yeah, at a loss. It was a big loss as well. Can't remember the exact figures, but it was like 15 million, I think they bought it at 10 years before. And then they sold it for 9 million. And obviously you've got inflation and all of that. So that was a significant loss. So it's, you know, they try and play it as if these things are like some strategic move for them. But it was very clear that that company wasn't doing that they weren't doing well, and they had to get rid of that business in Oldham as a result of the sustained campaigns against them. And they actually, you know, it's funny because sometimes they try and deny that the campaign was because of Palestine Action, but then in court they will say, oh, Palestine Action managed to shut down the Oldham weapons factory, you should use this against activists, right? So it's like the way that they use these things. But that was a significant victory. And then a few months later in the summer, there was a targeted 6 to 8 week campaign where people every day, every other day were outside the London headquarters. And this was just like, they started off, it was a super fancy office building. They had plant pots and an overhang and, all of these things that they like in the middle of London. And at the end, it was completely boarded up. They had to get rid of the overhang. Everything was taken down. And every other day, there were people on the front doors, shutting down that factory, spraying it with red paint. And that continuous campaigning, alongside a campaign against the landlords of the London headquarters, JLL, worked together basically, and they were forced to abandon that site in the summer of last year. And this is the thing about these, about direct action that's so powerful, is, they've got an office building in London. It takes 2 people to sit down in front of those doors and shut it down. And yes, you might be arrested, you might get held, 12, 14 hours in a cell, whatever it is, up to 24 hours, but you've shut down the headquarters of a huge multinational £1 billion Israeli weapons factory. And so the simplicity of direct action and the impact you can have is incredibly strong. And so it was shortly after that, in the end of last year, that we heard about them being kicked out of these contracts. And what was interesting about that one, as you said, was they said, so Alex Chalk was Defence Procurement Minister at the time, and he was getting asked questions about what Elbit's status was in these high-level government, MOD, Ministry of Defence contracts. And he responded by saying that in one of them, Elbit was removed, and it was because of operational sovereignty, and that they were removing them from a second one as well. And, when we look back at some of the actions that took part near around that time or before that time, people on the 74th anniversary of the Nakba broke into their Bristol building, which is one of their headquarters as well, occupied the site and dismantle the inside of that factory. And we've had others who have, in Scotland, got inside a Thales factory and destroyed the periscope, supposedly indestructible periscope of this nuclear submarine, which was one of the contracts Elbit was going to be working on. And what we realized is at that point is that every time people break inside these factories, not only are we disrupting them from being able to operate, but they are obliged. They have a special status, List X status, which means every time there's a security breach, they have to call up the Ministry of Defence and explain to them that the activists are back, they're back in our building, we've breached all of your security again. And they can't have that. They need to be secure. So when you keep breaching that security and you keep going at them, then it shows their weaknesses.
So Palestine Action has rendered insecure Israel's military presence. Essentially, its weapons manufacturing presence in this country, and limited its ability to gain from this particular market. Could you tell us about what has happened in Newcastle? Because this is the development of something directly owned by the Israeli state.
Yeah. So it was at the end of last year, it came out that Rafael, this is an Israeli government weapons manufacturer. Elbit is private. I mean, in terms of what they do, it's all the same thing, right? But this is the Israeli government. And they bought Pearson Engineering, which was a tank company in Newcastle. And on the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, people went onto the roof of this factory and dismantled the site as well. And they were going on trial, actually, on October the 3rd in Newcastle Crown Court. But when you look at Companies House, I mean, it's bizarre to see it, right? But you can see that this says it's owned by the Israeli Ministry of Finance. And this is the first time the Israeli government have a weapons factory in this country. That company is as old as the Nakba is. So I think it was very fitting that the action ended up happening on the Nakba, because 75 years old, it was established basically on the basis of ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people. And actually recently I think it was in Jenin, they used a Raphael loitering munition, which just is a suicide drone, in Jenin to assassinate a Palestinian. So that was Raphael. So it's all experimental. And the more you see how the Israeli weapons market works, is how much you can see that happening. Because normally they'd use an Elbit drone, but they're experimenting, constantly experimenting. And you can see this happening more and more in Jenin and the West Bank now. For years, for decades, you'd see these drones being used in Gaza, and people in Gaza would say that, when the Israeli troops withdrew from the ground, this is the manifestation of the occupation. This is what's maintaining the occupation. And it's not just it's the surveillance, it's them being, every move of theirs is watched. It's them knowing every move of theirs is watched by their occupier, by the ones who have massacred their families, already forced them out of their homes in previous parts of Palestine. This is what these drones are doing in Gaza, but now they're using it more and more in the West Bank. And one of the things that they talk about, this might be off topic, is that, that these suicide drones is that they last shorter hours. They need to last shorter hours, and that's why they can just explode on impact, right? They don't need to last very long. And they use, I think it's electrical engines rather than rotary engines like the Hermes 450, so you can't hear it. Because, they always talk in Gaza about how you can hear the drones, but if you can't hear it before it kills you, it's just killed by something dropping at you in the sky.
Yeah. And in the case of in Nablus, the old city, when they were trying to crush the Lion's Den with the collaboration of the traitorous Palestinian Authority, which is currently, as we speak, locking up, killing, chasing Palestinians for Israel, they sent into the old city of Nablus suicide drones into the flat of one of the targets. And you had them surrounded within their own living space by these suicide drones. So it's in this way that Israel is able to more and more make the occupation frictionless.
Yeah.
And it's that way that Palestine serves as a laboratory for this massive business, whether it's Israeli cyber companies or weapons companies outside in the rest of the world. Now, Huda, you are a daughter of Iraq, but you are also a daughter of Palestine. Do you have a message to send to your long struggling people that, through your actions, you are attempting to reach out your hand and join it with your brothers and sisters? Do you have a message to them just to wrap up the show today?
Yes, my message is that we are not stopping. We are not going to give up fighting, that the Palestinian people on the front lines are our inspiration. They are what give us strength. And for them, we're going to shut down Elbit Systems, and we're going to shut down all of these weapons companies. And no matter what the state does to us, we're never going to give up our fight.
Thank you very much, Huda. Please join us next time on The Watchdog here on Press. Thank you.